Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 15th of April 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to have Vanessa Beeley and Alex Thompson with us. Well, the sun is shining. We should all be out there getting rid of the bugs, Mike, but we're not.
No, indeed. So let's look at the latest stats, global cases. Let me welcome Vanessa Beeley to the programme. Welcome, Vanessa.
Hi, good to be back on.
Yes, okay, so look, what we're going to do today, Vanessa, is have a look at the relationships with Professor Neil Ferguson. Here he is of Imperial College. Of course, this is largely the man responsible for the lockdown policy because it was his computer model that seems to have justified it in the first place. Just to make the point here is the Vaccine Impact Modelling Consortium, of which he is a director. And we'll just look down through the list of people that work for this consortium, scientific and technical team, lots of software developers and these types of people and statisticians. There is apparently some medical expertise on there, but there's a bit of a history with Neil Ferguson with previous suggestions of extreme effects of pandemics.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back, I haven't. What I'm working on at the moment, as you know, Mike, is a series for UK Column, looking at the Gates effect, looking at the Gates influence behind basically all of the organisations who are driving, particularly US and UK government response to COVID-19. And of course, that will include organizations like World Health Organization, UNICEF, Anthony Fauci in the US, etc. But what I'm focusing on for the first part is Ferguson's connections. Now, Ferguson goes back, as you rightly say, he provided the modeling for the H1N1, the swine flu, for SARS, and of course, previously in 2001, foot and mouth disease, which was an unmitigated disaster. At least 4 million animals slaughtered unnecessarily, as the UK Column documentary brilliantly exposes, and I recommend everybody to go and find that on the website and to watch it. But basically, Ferguson heads up what he calls the Vaccine Impact Modelling Consortium, which is hosted by Imperial College. Now, this is where it starts, this nefarious background funding by Gates, by Microsoft, of all of these organizations and entities that, as I said, are driving the modeling, they're driving the response, and a very alarmist response to coronavirus. So Imperial College, now this is interesting as well, Imperial College itself has received 400 million from Wellcome Trust and 185 million from Bill Gates to date. But the actual Vaccine Impact Modelling Consortium is part funded by Gavi, which is the Vaccine Alliance. Now, the Vaccine Alliance, obviously, it makes claims on its websites of having vaccinated or working towards vaccination or immunization of half of the children of the world, an extraordinary claim. But Gavi was started 20 years ago with 750 million from Bill Gates, who identified, and this is a quote from the Gavi website, the power and potential of vaccines. So basically, the Gates at this point were looking for an outlet for their philanthropic activity, the philanthro-capitalist activity. They put $750 million into Gavi. But what is interesting, and I only pulled this up a couple of minutes before we actually went on air, the biggest contributor to Gavi between 2000 and 2020 is the British government. 23.44%. It outdoes Bill and Melinda Gates, 19.66%, and it's more than double the US sponsorship of Gavi. So this is a slight twist that I've only just discovered, that the British government, which of course has also been putting funding into the production of vaccines, which I'll come on to towards the end. But Gavi partners, UNICEF, World Health Organization, World Bank, and of course, Bill and Melinda Gates, and the sponsors that I've just talked about, namely, predominantly, the British government. Now, the Gavi Alliance is also part of ID 2020 Alliance. So therefore, they're involved in basically the mandatory biometric ID, which, as Brian mentioned at the beginning off air, this is effectively going to be brought in, we assume, under coronavirus, under the pandemic panic, this mandatory biometric identity. Now this, what they claim on their website, again, I looked just before I came on, proving who you are is a fundamental human right. So yet again, we see the destruction, the decimation of human rights, actually, our freedom, our liberty, under the banner of humanitarianism. Now, we've all heard this before. We've been taken into endless perpetual war under the pretext of humanitarianism. And here we see it being rolled out again to effectively enforce surveillance on us, to feed back our biometric data into a central artificial intelligence entity, which then, of course, can supply that information to governments to determine whether we are a threat or whether we contribute to the state. I mean, this is sort of terrifying technology, and what we're seeing here is the merger of organizations who are focusing on vaccination, immunization, in lockstep. And lockstep, I'm using that word intentionally because, of course, we see that Gavi, as part of the ID 2020 Alliance, partner with Rockefeller. 10 years ago, of course, we had the lockstep agenda, which was published by Rockefeller, which basically talks about, and I urge people to go and read this document, it basically describes exactly what is happening now.
So we've got Accenture, Microsoft, IDEO.org, Gavi and Rockefeller Foundation all working towards this ID 2020 initiative.
Yeah. And Gavi are funding Imperial College, they're funding Neil Ferguson's program to basically model the response, the British government response to coronavirus. So here we have a clear conflict of interest. I mean, you know, this is a total overstep by corporate interest into health issues in the UK.
And right at the heart of that, we have Bill Gates himself.
Yeah. And if we go forward, then we come on to the fact that Bill Gates established, alongside Norway, India, Wellcome Trust, and WEF, the World Economic Forum, in 2017, SAPI, the Coalition for Epidemic, I apologize for the dog being by me, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation. Now, what's interesting here, so yet again, we have another effectively accelerate funding for a new vaccine development. And what we're seeing now is SAPI coming into action, let's say, on the back of the coronavirus, on the back of COVID-19, to accelerate the development of a vaccine for COVID-19. And then if we continue, in December 2018, SAPI actually gave $8.4 million to Imperial College to develop vaccines against pathogens. The project was named RapidVac. It was supposed to incorporate the swine flu, basically H1N1, but it also, interestingly, in 2017, mentions what they determine as disease X. So basically, SAPI gave $8.4 million to Ferguson's department at Imperial College in 2017 to develop a vaccine against pathogens, unknown pathogens, disease X. So this was 3 years or 2 years before COVID-19 came into existence. The funding was already in place with Neil Ferguson, with Imperial College, to provide that vaccine.
Yeah. Well, of course, finance can't be too far away at any point. So vaccine bonds being issued.
Yes. So basically, at the same time that SAPI gave 8.4 million to Imperial College, SAPI and Gavi formed a partnership in which Gavi, which was, if you remember, established by Norway as part of the trust that sort of established them, they brokered a partnership using the Kingdom of Norway to provide sponsored bonds for SAPI. And in July 2019, 58.1 million was given in bonds to SAPI, as I said, brokered through Gavi, but paid out by the Kingdom of Norway.
Okay, and so here's Imperial College talking about tailor-made flu and disease X vaccines to be created, an $8 million project. And as you said earlier, the Wellcome Trust also right at the heart of this. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
No, so what we're basically seeing here is obviously the Wellcome Trust also has a huge interest in immunization and vaccination, but what we see here is a cluster of public sector, private sector coalitions coming together with huge power behind them to push the immunization program. And we have to remember, of course, that Gates's own program, he called it in 2010 the vaccine decade. And that will also then spill over into Anthony Fauci's response, because he heads up the development program for Gates. So what I'm saying is I'm focusing only on Ferguson at the moment, and he's to some degree a very small spoke in a very large wheel. But nevertheless, what he does is he radiates out, and you start to see how insidious this cluster is, and how it's basically pushing an agenda of immunization, of mandatory biometric identifying of people. And this is mass surveillance and mass medical interference, you know, with sometimes disastrous consequences, as we know from studying vaccines. And the interesting thing, what we've noticed, is that as soon as we start to put out any information on any of the social media platforms about Gates' association with vaccines, which is as clear as day, we come under huge attack by the pro-vaxxers. They attack us for a very short period of time, and then they back off completely. And quite often their tweets are deleted afterwards. So there's a very clear agenda, not only through Facebook, that's been basically sort of either deleting or notifying people that anything to do with coronavirus that does not adhere to the dominant narrative is fake news. So right from the beginning, there's been an attempt to stifle any dissent or any investigation into this situation. And what is extraordinary is this sort of the ultra-rich control of our health issues. And we have to ask at this point, who is controlling the British government? Ferguson provided the remodeling, but who is behind Ferguson? And we have the Wellcome Trust, we have Gavi, we have ID 2020, we have Rockefeller. We, you know, as deep as we go back, then we have an indication who is controlling our government's response to COVID-19.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much for that, Vanessa. Now stick with us, because Brian's going to be adding a bit more to this in 1 second. But just before he does, I wanted to just make this point, because anybody that heads over to Bill Gates' Instagram page at the moment will find a whole bunch of posts by Gates. And what really is perhaps it might be encouraging is the response that he's getting to this. So let's just have a look. Here's one of his posts and the type of responses that he's getting. Basically, he's getting so many comments on his posts at the moment that they can't delete them fast enough. So, you know, Hungary says, no, your time is coming soon, Billy, and so on. We won't read all of them out because some of them are quite offensive, but some posts here saying deleting our comments will not hide the truth, Bill. And it's not just one of his posts. It's just about every post that he has up there is getting these types of comments. I'll keep them on screen there, and you can look at them. You can freeze the video in your own time and look at them, or go and look at his Instagram account and see them for yourself. It's quite incredible. And then, you know, Bill Gates equals depopulation, no to your vaccine, and so on. So people are absolutely rejecting the message that Bill Gates is pushing forward, Brian.
Yeah, and this is very good. What was in my mind is if people were doing this with their own MPs, bombarding them to this extent, we might be able to get some of these spineless MPs to actually stand up and challenge the COVID-19 lockdown at the moment. But Vanessa, just to reinforce what you're saying, and it's a little bit of a recap from our news on Monday, just want to look at the government documents which show this incestuous relationship with Mr. Gates. So this was a report, Private Foundations, from back in 2012, and if we highlight it, there was actually a massive section on the Gates Foundation and its relationship with the Department for International Development. In the document, you had tables of projects where Gates is involved. So we've got the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunisation, Gavi, which you've been talking about. We've got the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, the Rollback Malaria, the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. They all sound wonderful, but when you get into those projects and look at the actual effects, many of them have been extremely damaging. And I think it's unbelievably cruel and cynical that he uses third world countries to carry out his experiments. And we can ask the question that you are intimating, really, which is, what is the relationship between this man and the British government? Is the British government using Bill Gates, or is Bill Gates actually the paymaster of the British government? Well, more on that in a minute. We highlighted this, that even in the House of Commons report, it was noted that Gates was getting favourable airtime. He was getting favourable relationships with the British government over even other foundations and charities, and it was noted with these statements that basically Gates' experience of regular contact with DFID was not shared by smaller UK-based foundations. So Gates comes in with his billions and he's got the government's ear. If you're a smaller UK organisation, you're pushed out the side. So why does he enjoy these privileges? Has he got power over people? Is he buying them? These are the questions we need the British government to answer. And then it gets more interesting, because this was pointed out to me, Guardian article from the 4th of March, and Professor Chris Whitty, the expert we need in the coronavirus crisis, and it says even Number 10 has realised the value of this impressive Chief Medical Officer for England. Well, really, so what does it say? It says that Whitty spent much of his childhood in northern Nigeria. His father worked for the British Council but was shot dead in Athens. That was a mistake, apparently. And then it goes on to say that in 2008, Whitty was awarded $40 million by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for malarial research in Africa. If somebody gives you $40 million, Mike, they own you. If that sum of money came into the UK column, we couldn't possibly claim to be independent. But a year later, Whitty's appointed Chief Scientific Advisor to the Department for International Development. So you get the money, then you get the promotion on the back of a present. And as you've said, Gavi and Bill and Melinda Gates absolutely in bed together. We've now got a new organisation coming to the fore, SAGE, and the Telegraph has picked up on this, and it's asking some questions. First of all, it's saying that SAGE is chaired by Sir Patrick Vallance. We'll come on to him in just a second. But it's saying this is a very secretive organisation. People change. And the Telegraph has seen evidence that SAGE doesn't want to listen to any experts challenging the government's priorities at the moment on COVID. Here's the chairman. He's an ex-GlaxoSmithKline man, so totally independent, of course. Mike. And to put it together to help people, because it's complex, but the government is running a pro-vaccination. I'm calling it a profit scam. The Department for International Development is key. It is helping to promote and work and fund Bill Gates. But of course, Bill Gates is getting his own publicity from the BBC. In the sidelines, Imperial College has been pumping in those flawed statistics to ramp up fear of the virus. And they've also been working with Gavi to promote vaccinations for Bill Gates. And then we've got DFID pumping money in, and we learn that DFID is going to be hosting the Global Vaccine Summit 2020 in June for Gavi itself. How incestuous do you have to get? And on the sidelines, then we can now see that Bill Gates just gave that 40 million, not a bung, you mustn't call it a bung, to Chris Whitty. And he happens to also be one of the people sitting on the SAGE board, which is denying evidence from other people. So if you ask, how does it work? That's how it works. People can freeze their screen and look at it. And I'll just end by saying that what is the damage this lockdown is doing? Nobody is reporting the true damage. But a viewer kindly sent in to us this morning that they'd had a conversation with the Federation for Small Business, and they've said that basically there's no help at the moment for the 4.9 million self-employed, and those people contribute over 275 billion to the economy. So the country's being wrecked, Mike.
We'll come on to that in 1 second. Vanessa, any closing thoughts on this? And when are we going to see your first instalment?
Hopefully tomorrow, Mike. But after your editing, it might be the day after that it's actually published.
Okay.
I think it's also important, Brian. I mean, you know, this is such a vast network. It's very hard to sort of bring it all together. But I think what's important is the primary UK funding of Gavi, which actually took me by surprise, but also the fact that they've already pledged 20 million to CEPI, to the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, which of course is the other Gates organisation, a coalition that was set up to further immunization agendas. But also in March 2020, the Gates Foundation, Wellcome and MasterCard committed 125 million in seed funding to speed up the response to COVID-19. So what we're seeing all the time, and of course WHO, which of course one of the biggest funders is Bill Gates, the second biggest after the United States. Trump is now threatening, and I believe he has withdrawn funding, so that puts Gates up at the top there. So all of these organizations that are pushing the alarmist message on COVID-19 are very heavily influenced by Bill Gates. And when we look at Bill Gates's agenda, we know it's the vaccine decade. We know that he's looking to immunize, as he said, 7 billion people. He's threatening that the lockdown be maintained until the vaccination is ready. You know, this isn't some kind of benign humanitarian response to COVID-19. In my opinion, there is too much evidence to show that COVID-19, whatever COVID-19 is, this entire response has been planned in advance. It is now being put into action, let's say, and it's being supported by all of these organizations that are funded and have been funded for some time by Bill Gates. We can't ignore this fact. You know, as much as people want to call us conspiracy theorists, what we're presenting is facts. How you interpret that fact, of course, is up to you. We interpret it one way. Others may interpret it that, well, you know, he's just trying to be helpful. He's just trying to vaccinate us. But please, people, look at the effects of vaccine. Look at the other side of the argument, because in my opinion, this isn't, you know, some kind of benign venture on behalf of Bill Gates.
Vanessa, thank you for that. And before we move on with an eye on the clock, I also had an email that came in and said, was I aware that Imperial College has now got an initiative called Dream Warriors, and they want to use everybody's smartphone as a computer to build a computer network to model very difficult aspects of virus propagation. It just gets more in your face.
Absolutely. Right. Okay, Vanessa, thank you very much for that today. Now let's move on because, well, let's start off by saying if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support our work, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. There are options to help us out there. But let's bring Alex Thompson onto the programme now and talk about an article that's been published yesterday afternoon, Alex, about Beata Banner, a legal. Well, how do we describe her, Alex?
Beata Banner is a medical lawyer, Mike, and whether she'll be allowed to practice after this, I don't know. But she is quite a leading medical lawyer in the German university city of Heidelberg, a city